Inside Georgia Diagnostic Prison, America's death row intake. For most prisoners in Georgia, incarceration begins with uncertainty. But for a small number of men, it begins with something far darker. Before they reach Georgia's death row, before the appeals, the years of isolation, and the endless legal battles, they pass through a place few Americans have ever seen. A prison designed not only to evaluate inmates, but to process some of the state's most notorious killers. A place where every movement is documented. Every weakness is observed. And where the reality of a death sentence becomes impossible to ignore. This is Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison. And for many condemned inmates, this is where the final chapter begins. Before we continue, subscribe for more in-depth prison and crime documentaries, and leave a comment sharing where you're watching from. Because the story you're about to hear reveals what happens behind one of America's most secretive prison walls. And what awaits some of Georgia's most dangerous inmates is far more complicated than most people realize. The gateway to Georgia's prison system. Located in Jackson, Georgia, approximately 50 miles southeast of Atlanta, Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison serves a unique role within the state's correctional system. Unlike traditional prisons built primarily for long-term housing, this facility was designed to assess, classify, and process inmates entering state custody. The institution opened in 1984 and quickly became one of the most important facilities in the Georgia prison network. Its purpose sounds straightforward. Determine where inmates should be housed. Evaluate security risks. Review medical conditions. Assess mental health. Assign prisoners to facilities throughout the state. But over time, the prison became known for something else. Something that transformed its national reputation. Georgia's male death row. Today, the prison houses inmates awaiting execution, along with prisoners requiring specialized medical and mental health services. For many Georgians sentenced to death, this facility becomes their permanent home. And unlike the dramatic images often portrayed in movies, life here is defined less by sudden violence and more by long periods of control, observation, and isolation. Every person entering the facility is evaluated. Staff examine criminal histories, gang affiliations, psychological conditions, medical records, behavioral risks. The goal is simple. Understand exactly who has arrived behind the walls. But when the inmate has been sentenced to die, those evaluations take on an entirely different meaning. Because officials are not just determining where someone will live. They're determining how someone will spend what could be the rest of their life. And in some cases, decades. What happens after intake often surprises people. Because death row is not always what the public imagines. And the reality begins with a process few prisoners ever forget. Arrival after sentencing. Imagine hearing a jury return a death sentence. Hours earlier, you were fighting for your future. Now, that future has fundamentally changed. The transport to Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison often marks the moment when the reality becomes undeniable. For condemned inmates, arrival is not dramatic. No speeches. No announcements. No final declarations. Instead, there is paperwork. Search procedures. Photographs. Fingerprints. Medical examinations. Questions. Lots of questions. The process is designed to establish complete control from the very beginning. Correctional staff document nearly everything. Physical condition. Personal property. Medical needs. Mental state. Potential security concerns. Every detail becomes part of an official record. Some prisoners arrive angry. Others appear detached. Some still believe their convictions will eventually be overturned. Others begin adjusting immediately to the possibility of spending the rest of their lives behind concrete walls. And while the prison is heavily secured, staff face a unique challenge. Many condemned inmates have already experienced years of legal proceedings. They understand the system. They know how prisons work. Some have spent time in county jails, state facilities, or federal institutions. The prison is not receiving inexperienced offenders. It is often receiving individuals convicted of some of the most serious crimes in Georgia. Murder cases. Multiple homicides. Killings involving police officers. Crimes that generated enormous public attention. The names may differ. The backgrounds may vary. But every arrival shares one thing in common. The state has decided their punishment will be death. What happens next can stretch not for months, but for decades. Inside death row. When people hear the phrase death row, many imagine a place where executions happen quickly. The reality is very different. Most condemned inmates spend years appealing their convictions. Many spend decades. As a result, death row becomes less of a temporary holding area and more of a long-term living environment. At Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, Condemned prisoners are generally housed separately from the broader inmate population. Security remains extremely strict. Movement is controlled. Schedules are regulated. Interactions are limited. A typical cell is small and heavily secured. Concrete walls. Steel doors. Minimal furnishings. Few personal possessions. For some inmates, these spaces become the center of their world for years. Imagine waking up every morning in the same room. Seeing the same walls. Walking the same few steps. Knowing your legal future remains uncertain. Some prisoners maintain hope through appeals. Others focus on routine. Reading. Writing. Exercise. Religious study. Correspondence. Small habits become major events. Because routine is often the only thing that creates structure. Yet even here, prison politics continue to exist. Human beings naturally create social systems. Even in highly restricted environments. And behind these walls, survival depends on understanding those systems. Because what happens between prisoners can be just as important as what happens between prisoners and staff. And sometimes, far more dangerous. The unwritten rules. Every prison operates under two systems. The official rules. And the unofficial ones. Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison is no exception. The official rules are written in policy manuals. The unofficial rules are learned through observation. Respect matters. Information matters. Reputation matters. Prisoners quickly learn when to speak. When to stay silent. Who can be trusted. And who cannot. Violating these unwritten expectations can create problems that official discipline cannot always prevent. In highly controlled environments, relationships become valuable. A conversation. A favor. Access to information. Even small interactions can carry significance. This does not mean the prison operates like the gang-dominated yards seen in maximum security prisons across the country. Death row conditions create a different dynamic. But human behavior never disappears. People adapt. They build routines. They establish social connections where possible. And they find ways to navigate confinement. Some inmates become known for helping others understand legal procedures. Some become respected for maintaining calm behavior. Others develop reputations that isolate them. The prison environment remembers everything. Arguments. Conflicts. Debts. Disrespect. Years can pass. Memories often do not. And in a place where time moves slowly, reputation can become one of the few forms of currency that still exists. But what happens when those tensions boil over? The answer reveals another side of life inside the prison. A side few people ever see. Discipline and control. Maintaining order inside any prison is difficult. Maintaining order inside a facility that houses death-sentenced inmates presents unique challenges. Georgia correctional staff rely on a combination of observation, restrictions, and disciplinary procedures. Every movement is monitored. Doors open according to schedule. Counts occur throughout the day. Searches happen regularly. Rules are enforced continuously. When inmates violate prison regulations, consequences can follow. Privileges may be restricted. Movement can be reduced. Property can be limited. Depending on the severity of the incident, additional sanctions may be imposed. Most days pass without major incidents. That reality often surprises outsiders. Prisons are frequently portrayed as constant battlegrounds. In reality, routine dominates much of daily life. However, when violence does occur, the response is immediate. Officers train extensively for emergency situations. Control must be restored quickly. Not only to protect staff, but to protect prisoners as well. Because even facilities designed for maximum security remain vulnerable to unpredictable human behavior. And nowhere is that reality more apparent than during the long psychological strain of death row confinement. The effects can be profound. And sometimes devastating. The psychological weight of waiting. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of death row is not the physical environment. It is the uncertainty. Years pass. Appeals continue. Court decisions arrive slowly. Deadlines come and go. Life becomes a series of waiting periods. Waiting for hearings. Waiting for rulings. Waiting for legal updates. Waiting for answers that may never come. Psychologists and researchers have long debated the effects of prolonged death row confinement. Some inmates adapt. Others struggle. Anxiety. Depression. Isolation. Hopelessness. These experiences are documented throughout correctional systems worldwide. For prisoners, the challenge often becomes creating meaning inside an environment where control over the future is extremely limited. Many turn to religion. Others focus on education. Some dedicate years to studying legal materials. Others maintain relationships through letters and phone calls. Family connections become lifelines. A single conversation can influence an inmate's emotional state for weeks. But not everyone has support. Some prisoners lose contact with the outside world almost entirely. As the years accumulate, relationships fade. Friends disappear. Relatives pass away. Entire generations grow older. Meanwhile, the prisoner remains in the same environment, watching time move forward without them. And eventually, for a small number of inmates, the appeals process reaches its conclusion. When that happens, the atmosphere inside the prison changes dramatically. Because the next stage involves preparations few people ever witness. When an execution date is set. For years, an execution may feel distant. A legal possibility rather than an immediate reality. Then a date is scheduled. Suddenly, everything changes. The legal teams become more active. Media attention increases. Family members prepare for difficult decisions. Correctional staff begin following procedures established long before. Executions are among the most scrutinized events within the correctional system. Every step follows protocol. Every action is documented. Every detail is reviewed. The process involves numerous personnel, administrators, security staff, medical professionals, legal representatives, witnesses. Each individual has a specific role. For inmates, reactions vary dramatically. Some continue pursuing last-minute appeals. Others focus on family communication. Some grant interviews. Others withdraw almost completely. The final days often become emotionally intense for everyone involved. Not only for the condemned prisoner, but also for prison employees responsible for carrying out state policy. Because behind every execution is a reality rarely discussed. The people working inside the institution must continue returning to work afterward. And many carry those experiences with them for years. Yet even before an execution occurs, another group experiences a different kind of burden. The officers assigned to death row. Their perspective is often overlooked. But understanding their role reveals a side of the prison story that rarely reaches the public. The men and women who work there. Most discussions about prisons focus on inmates. Far fewer focus on staff. Yet correctional officers spend thousands of hours inside these environments. They witness arrivals, transfers, conflicts, medical emergencies, appeals, executions, and everything in between. The work requires constant awareness. A momentary lapse can have serious consequences. Officers must enforce rules consistently while maintaining professionalism. They encounter individuals at some of the lowest moments of their lives. And they do so day after day. For staff assigned to death row, relationships become complicated. Years of interaction create familiarity. Yet professional boundaries remain essential. An officer may supervise the same inmate for decades. They may know details about that inmate's family, legal history, health conditions, daily habits. But they must never forget their role. This balance can be emotionally demanding. Because prisons are ultimately human environments. Behind every cell door is a person. Behind every uniform is another person. And both groups must navigate a system neither fully controls. That reality becomes especially visible during the prison's most controversial moments. Moments that have sparked public debate far beyond Georgia's borders. Death row and the national debate. Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison exists at the center of a larger national conversation. The death penalty remains one of the most debated issues in American criminal justice. Supporters argue it provides accountability for the most serious crimes. Opponents raise concerns about wrongful convictions, fairness, and ethics. These debates unfold in courtrooms, legislatures, universities, newsrooms, and public forums across the country. But inside the prison, the debate becomes tangible. Because the policies discussed by politicians and legal scholars directly affect real people. Victims' families, correctional employees, attorneys, and inmates. Regardless of where someone stands on the issue, the prison represents a place where those debates intersect with daily reality. Concrete walls, steel doors, human consequences. The institution itself does not decide guilt or innocence. It does not determine sentencing law. Its role is to carry out responsibilities assigned by the state. Yet its existence remains inseparable from the broader questions surrounding capital punishment. Questions that continue evolving year after year. And perhaps that is what makes this prison so significant. Not simply what happens inside it, but what it represents outside its walls. The first 72 hours. For most prisoners entering Georgia's correctional system, the first 72 hours inside Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison are among the most important days of their incarceration. Everything begins with observation. Correctional staff are not simply processing paperwork. They are gathering information that could affect where an inmate spends years, or even decades. Medical evaluations are conducted. Mental health screenings take place. Criminal records are reviewed. Gang affiliations are investigated. Behavioral histories are examined. The prison is attempting to answer a critical question. Who exactly has entered the system? An inmate convicted of a violent gang-related murder may require a different placement than someone convicted of a financial crime. A prisoner with severe mental illness may need specialized treatment. Someone with a history of assaults on staff may require additional security precautions. These decisions are not made lightly. A mistake in classification can place inmates, officers, and entire housing units at risk. For death sentence prisoners, the process carries additional significance. Unlike most inmates, they already know where they are likely headed. But even then, officials must assess medical conditions, mental health concerns, and potential security issues. Some prisoners arrive defiant. Others appear exhausted after years of court proceedings. Many are entering a prison environment unlike anything they have experienced before. And while the outside world often focuses on crimes and sentences, staff inside the prison focus on something different. Control. Because maintaining order begins long before an inmate reaches a permanent cell. And nowhere is that more important than in a facility responsible for housing some of Georgia's highest risk offenders. The daily rhythm of death row. Life on death row is often defined by repetition. The same corridor. The same cell. The same routine. Again and again. A typical day begins early. Counts are conducted. Meals are distributed. Movement is controlled according to strict schedules. Throughout the day, inmates may have opportunities for recreation, showers, phone calls, legal work, or visits, depending on institutional rules and individual status. But nothing happens spontaneously. Every movement requires authorization. Every schedule is controlled by the institution. To an outsider, the routine may seem monotonous. To prisoners, it often becomes essential. Routine creates structure. Structure creates predictability. And predictability can become a powerful coping mechanism. Some inmates spend hours reading. Others study legal documents. Many write letters. Some keep journals. A number of prisoners become deeply involved in religious practice. Others focus on physical exercise. Push-ups. Walking inside the cell. Bodyweight routines repeated thousands of times over the years. Time becomes a resource that must be managed. Because there is so much of it. A prisoner who arrives at age 30 could still be sitting in the same prison 20 years later. Think about that. Entire careers begin and end. Technology changes. Presidents come and go. Children become adults. Yet inside the prison, the daily rhythm remains remarkably similar. And that passage of time creates challenges few people fully understand. Because surviving death row is not only about physical endurance. It is also about surviving mentally. The men who wait decades. One of the least understood realities of death row is how long inmates often remain there. Many people assume executions occur shortly after sentencing. In reality, appeals can last for decades. State appeals. Federal appeals. Post-conviction reviews. Constitutional challenges. Each stage can take years. As a result, some prisoners grow old behind death row walls. Hair turns gray. Health declines. The world outside transforms. Yet the legal process continues. For some inmates, these years are spent fighting to overturn convictions. Others argue that their sentences should be reduced. Some seek new trials. Others challenge evidence, witness testimony, or legal procedures. Not every appeal succeeds. Many do not. But the process remains a fundamental part of the American justice system. Supporters argue it helps prevent irreversible mistakes. Critics argue it prolongs suffering for victims' families and delays justice. Inside the prison, those debates become personal. Every legal filing represents hope for someone. Every denied appeal represents disappointment. And every court decision can dramatically alter an inmate's future. The waiting becomes a way of life. A difficult one. But a life nonetheless. And over the years, prisoners develop different strategies to endure it. Some find purpose. Some lose it. Others spend years searching for it. What happens psychologically during that journey can be difficult to witness. Isolation and the human mind. Human beings are social creatures. Prisons cannot change that reality. But death row confinement often limits interaction significantly compared to life outside prison. Researchers have spent decades studying the effects of long-term isolation and restricted social contact. The findings are complex. Not every inmate reacts the same way. Some prisoners adapt surprisingly well. Others struggle. Anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances, emotional withdrawal. These challenges have been documented in correctional systems around the world. The human mind seeks stimulation, conversation, connection, purpose. When those things become limited, inmates often create their own coping mechanisms. Some become avid readers. Others write extensively. A number pursue educational opportunities where available. Religious faith becomes a source of stability for many prisoners. Letters from family members can carry enormous emotional significance. A single photograph may be treasured for years. A phone call lasting only minutes may become the most important event of an entire week. The smallest connections can take on extraordinary value. Yet even these coping strategies cannot erase a difficult reality. Every inmate on death row understands why they are there. Every inmate understands what sentence hangs over them. That awareness never completely disappears. And when legal developments begin accelerating, the emotional pressure often intensifies. Because eventually, for some prisoners, uncertainty gives way to something more concrete: an execution warrant. The final appeals. As appeals near their conclusion, legal activity often increases dramatically. Attorneys work through enormous amounts of documentation. Investigators review evidence. Courts examine filings that may determine whether an execution proceeds. For families on both sides, these periods can be emotionally exhausting. Victims' relatives may have waited decades for legal proceedings to conclude. Families of condemned inmates often hope for last-minute intervention. Every ruling becomes significant. Every hearing matters. Every deadline carries weight. Some cases generate national attention. Others remain largely unknown outside legal circles. But inside Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, the consequences are immediate. Prison administrators must prepare for multiple possibilities. Appeals could continue. Execution dates could be postponed. Sentences could change. Or the process could move forward. The uncertainty affects everyone connected to the case. And as the final legal stages unfold, another group begins preparing quietly behind the scenes. The correctional staff. Because regardless of personal beliefs, they are responsible for carrying out the procedures established by law. And those responsibilities are unlike almost any other job in American corrections. The execution chamber. Few places inside American prisons generate more public attention than execution chambers. Georgia's execution procedures have evolved over time, reflecting changes in law and policy. The details are heavily regulated. Protocols are reviewed repeatedly. Documentation is extensive. Every step follows established procedures. Contrary to popular imagination, these events are not chaotic. They are highly structured, carefully planned, extensively monitored. Multiple witnesses may be present depending on state regulations. Medical personnel play defined roles. Administrators oversee operations. Security remains extensive throughout the process. For prison staff, these events often represent the most difficult responsibilities of their careers. Some officers may spend years supervising a particular inmate before participating in procedures connected to that inmate's execution. That reality creates emotional complexities rarely visible to the public. Because prisons operate within systems of law. But they are still inhabited by human beings. And human beings are rarely untouched by experiences of this magnitude. For many employees, these memories remain long after their shifts end. Long after media coverage fades. Long after public attention moves elsewhere. And that raises an important question. What is life like for the people who work here year after year? The answer reveals another side of Georgia Diagnostic Prison that rarely reaches the headlines. As the sun sets beyond the fences of Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, the questions surrounding justice, punishment, and life behind bars remain. For the men housed on death row, time moves differently. Days become years, and years become decades, all within the confines of concrete and steel. What happens inside these walls is largely hidden from public view, yet the decisions made here carry consequences that extend far beyond the prison itself. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth stories from the world of prisons, crime, and criminal justice. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, behind every prison wall is a story few people ever get to see.